Have you ever wondered why some nations are rich and why some nations are poor? Well, welcome to my historical classroom, where in just a few minutes, you're going to discover that politics is easy as pie. My name is Bob McEwen, and I majored in finance and economics and served in government for a couple of decades, in fact, 6 terms in Congress, and I watched as to why America seemed to prosper so much and other nations seemed to struggle. Over the next few minutes, we're going to discuss, and you'll be able to understand for the rest of your life, why a place like America, only 4% of the population of the world, and yet it writes more books, more plays, more symphonies, more copyrights, more inventions. For thousands of years, people looked at the sky and hoped to someday be able to fly. But it was the Americans that invented the airplane and the light bulb, the telegraph, the telephone, the global positioning system, the internet, put men on the moon. When a ship is landing in Hong Kong, it uses a global positioning system that was invented, created, and maintained by Americans. When a plane is landing at an airport in Africa, they rely upon the Americans to maintain that global positioning system. When a shop owner in Buenos Aires orders a part from Detroit, Michigan, he uses an internet that was invented, maintained, and created by Americans. You know, the 4th largest nation on earth, the GDP, the gross domestic product, that's all the goods and services, the entire wealth is generated by the 4th largest nation on earth, is smaller than is produced in the state of Louisiana. The 6th largest nation on earth, smaller than the state of Arkansas. Why is it that Americans are so successful? 100 million Filipinos produce less wealth every year than the 3.5 to 4 million Okies in Oklahoma. Why is it that half of all the people on earth live on less than $2 a day? Half of those, that'd be a fourth, they live on less than $1 a day. The 2nd richest spot on earth is Western Europe, France, Germany, and Britain. In America, we have a level below which we will not permit a person to sink. You come to this country, sit down on the park bench, gripe and complain about the country, we will bury you with stamps for food, a roof over your head, a bed to sleep in, unlimited health care and education for you and your family. A person living in poverty in America. Not my opinion. This is the Rector study done by the Heritage Foundation, Wall Street Journal, every 24 months for over 30 years. A person living in poverty in America is more likely to have a telephone,
Hello.
a television, an air conditioner, an automobile, eats more meat, and has more square footage space than the average resident of the 2nd richest spot on earth, Western Europe. The question would be why? And it's important that we know the answer to that, because if we don't, we're liable to elect people who want to fundamentally change America, and if they do that, there'll be no place for us to go. It's really not that complicated. It's really quite simple. Politics is easy as pie. Politics equals integrity plus economics. I don't care if you're voting in Boston or Baghdad or Belgium or Buenos Aires. You only vote on 2 things. You vote on integrity, right and wrong, and you vote on economics. Let's explain. Integrity. I grew up in a small town. That's where people gave their word, and you looked them in the eye and shook their hand, and you knew that they would honor what they said. And when I got to Washington and other places, and I discovered that when I went to rely on people, sometimes they weren't there. Back home, they would have honored it, but when I looked around, they weren't there. And it wasn't that they'd done anything wrong. It wasn't that they were immoral or illegal. It's just that they lacked integrity. That is, we couldn't count. And so I had to come up with a definition of integrity, and I came up with this: trustworthy, reliable, performs the task for which it was assigned. You say a bank has integrity, or a fire well has integrity. It means you can count on it. But integrity is made up of two parts. First of all, it is morality, and I define morality as not doing what's wrong. You know what was on the classroom wall that said, "Thou shalt not steal"? That meant you could leave your bicycle in the front yard and you didn't have to worry about people coming and getting it, because everyone knew that those are things that you don't do. A moral person, he doesn't bear false witness. When he signs a contract or shakes his hands, he's going to keep his word. We don't covet. In America, we never had to worry. We don't have walls around our properties, unlike the rest of the world. Why? People would say, you don't even know where your yard stops and where the next door neighbors are. Why? We don't care, because we never coveted to have their house or to have another person's home. In America, we always said that someday we want to have a house like that. We want to have a home like that, because we had a moral standard of right and wrong. And so, integrity includes morality of not doing what's wrong. But integrity is more than that. You know, you can sit on a couch all day and do nothing and be moral. Edmund Burke said, all that's necessary for tyranny to prosper is for good men to do nothing. So it has to be something more than that. I define character as doing what is right. And so your daughter comes home from school and says, you know, everybody was picking on Sally today and making fun of her and calling her fatty and all, but I didn't do it. I didn't do it. That's good. You did not do anything wrong. But did you have the character to do what was right? You can be a moral person and lack character. In other words, you can just not do anything wrong, but really not do anything at all, and people can't count on you just because you're not there. But by definition, you cannot be a person of character and be immoral. You cannot do what is right if you're doing what's wrong. And so, in order for it to work, we need to have a standard of what is right. And that standard, our founders knew to choose. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So, politics, integrity. Let's talk about economics. I'm now going to share with you 95% of all the economics you'll ever need to know. Very simply, let's suppose this line represents 100% of your income, 100% of the income of a city or a state or a nation. Let's say it represents a $100 bill. And you go into Walmart and the most expensive thing in the store is $99 and you have 100. That means you are completely free to choose anything in the store. Now, let us suppose that someone comes along and takes 25% of it away from you. Well, two things happen. First of all, you have fewer choices. There are some things you can no longer choose. Thomas Jefferson said, freedom is having choices. Everyone knows that the more choices I take, when I tell you to get up and go to bed, the more choices I take away from you, the less freedom you have, and the more money I take away from you, the lower the standard of living. Now, let's suppose someone comes along and takes 50% away. What happens? Even fewer choices, even less freedom, even lower standard of living. Suppose someone comes along and takes 75, leaves you with 25. Even fewer choices, less freedom, lower standard of living. Let us suppose that someone comes along and takes it all. What do we call a person who works all day and keeps absolutely nothing? That person is called a slave. Now, there are two people that can come and take money away from you. One is called a criminal. He has a gun, and he can take money away from you. The other is called the government. Also has a gun, and can come and take money away from you. Here's the point. The impact is the same. You go to the pay window, you walk across the parking lot, a fellow comes up, puts a gun in your rib, says, I want 50% of all the money you've earned this week. You go home, sit down with your wife and children and say, this is how much money we have for food, clothing, and shelter. This is the kind of vacation we can take, this kind of car we can drive. Or let us suppose that you make it all the way out to your truck and you open up the paycheck and you see that Uncle Sam's already been here, and you see the local taxes and the state taxes. You see that half your money is gone. You sit down with your family, this is how much we have. The impact is the same. And so the principle comes, that is, that the greater the freedom, the greater the wealth. The greater the government, the greater the poverty. And it only works this way, by the way, every time. And so the nations that have great abundance are the nations that have great freedom. And when you and I vote, there are only two knobs that we turn. One is integrity. That is, how much do we have to spend to put bars on the windows of our store? How much security agents do we have to protect our buildings at night? How much do we have to litigation because we don't keep our word? How much do we waste because of lack of integrity? And how much is taken from us by government? It's a constant competition. Government wants to take. As government grows, man's rights diminish. As the individual grows, government diminished. America had the greatest freedom in the history of the world. That's why it created all the wealth and blessings for the rest of the world. And there's a constant effort to take away from freedom, take away from individuals, and give it to government. And that's what politics is all about. Now, I majored in finance and economics, and they told us that the reason America was successful was because it had lots of natural resources and temperate climate, and we were hard workers and all. And yet, if you look around the world, you can see that where freedom prospers, in Hong Kong, it didn't have any natural resources at all. When the British turned Hong Kong back to the Chinese, the output per person on that little island rock called Hong Kong, the productivity per person was 40 times, 40 times as great as in China under communism. When they divided Korea at the 38th parallel at the end of the Korean War, North Korea and South Korea, same heritage, same climate, same language, same culture. North Korea got socialism. South Korea got freedom. North Korea got 75% of the arable land. South Korea got mountains and 25% of the arable land. At the time that they divided the country, South Korea was third from the bottom, the third poorest nation on the planet. And yet today, North Korea is in total poverty. In fact, North Korea, over a 5-year period, had 2.5 million people starve. First thing you do is food, clothing, shelter. They couldn't even do food. They eat sticks and leaves just to fill their stomachs. South Korea, same heritage, culture, climate, language. South Korea had freedom, and yet last year had the 10th largest GDP in the world. Question, of course, has to be why. You know, at the same time that South Korea was very, very poor, in Japan, at the end of World War II, they had experienced a hydrogen bomb in Nagasaki. And this is what it looked like at the end of World War II. Nagasaki was pretty much destroyed by the atomic bomb. But Americans had brought freedom to Japan, and Nagasaki today looks entirely different. In fact, freedom creates wealth. At the same time that Nagasaki looked like this, Detroit was the richest city in the world. Not even close, nearly by a fifth, by 18% richer than any other city in the world. This is the train station in Detroit that in 1915 was dedicated as one of the most beautiful public edifices on the planet. In fact, people came from all over the world just to see the murals in the train station in Detroit. The elected people said, we can put a stop to this. And so they made a series of decisions that today, if we saw what happened in Japan, we saw what happened in Korea, Detroit is now the poorest city in all of North America. In fact, there are 28,000 single-family dwellings that are no longer not inhabited or uninhabitable. They've been destroyed. The question would be, why and how do these things happen? If you showed me on the chart that by taking away people's freedom, their choices, and their money, people become poor, why is it that people do that? I mean, politicians tell us that they're taking money from us to help us. They're trying to do good. You're telling me that when they take money away, that somehow or another everyone is worse off? Well, let me explain how that works. Let us suppose that you're going to buy something for yourself. It's your money and you're buying it for yourself. That's called a first-party purchase. You care about two things. You care about the price because you're paying for it, and you care about the quality because you're going to consume it. Nobody can make that decision as well as you can. You might pay $4 for a cup of coffee at 7 in the morning for which you wouldn't pay 50 cents at 2:30 in the afternoon. When it's your money for yourself, you're going to use it to the maximum benefit. Now, let us suppose that one of those two things is not controlled by you. Let us suppose you're going to buy something for someone else, so therefore you do care about the price because you're paying for it, but you're a little more flexible on the quality. You know, by the time it breaks, they'll be married for 4 years. They'll forget who gave it to them anyway. We've all bought things for people that we never would have bought for ourselves. We've all received things as gifts we never would have purchased for ourselves. We care about the price because we're paying for it, but we're not as concerned about the quality. Now, let us suppose that that's inverted. Let us suppose we're going to consume something. Do we care about the quality? Yes, because we're consuming it, but we're not nearly as concerned about the price because we're not paying for it. Let me explain. Let us suppose that the waitress comes by and says, "Would you like to have some orange juice?" And you say, well, how much is it? And she says, well, it's $3 a glass. And you say, no, really, I'm fine. I don't need any orange juice. She said, oh, you got the pancakes. Well, it comes with the pancakes. Well, in that case, I'll take 3 glasses. You pour away. You might leave half a glass. You wouldn't do that if you were paying for it. You care about the quality because you're consuming it. You're not concerned about the price because you're not paying for it. Any father that ever got talked into an open bar at a wedding understands how this works. Final example. Let us suppose that where you work, everybody that comes to work late has to put $5 in the kitty, and at the end of the month they take all the money and they raffle it off for something, and it's the last day of the month, and so the boss says to you, John, why don't you count how much money's in the kitty there and buy something with it, and we'll raffle it off at the end of the day. So you go and you count the money and you find out there's $150 there. So you go off to lunch and you come back and you almost forgot about it. You think, oh my goodness, I don't have time for this. What am I going to do? I have to buy something with this $150. And you look around and there in the store window is a 6-foot-tall stuffed frog. And you go over and you check the price, and the price is $149. Oh, this is great. And so you buy the frog and you take it over and you shove it in the closet, and at the end of the day, the boss invites everybody down and lectures to them about being late, and then everybody draws a number to see who wins, and Sally wins. What does she win? You go over, open the door, 6-foot-tall frog. Everybody laughs and claps. Oh, that's so wonderful. You go out in the parking lot, shove it in the front seat of your car, watch her drive off to the parking lot. Everybody's cheering as she's driving with this frog in the front seat. What is that called? That is called a third-party purchase. A third-party purchase is purchasing something with money that's not yours, therefore you don't care about the price, to purchase something that you're not going to consume, therefore you don't care about the quality. Now, what I'm about to say is not Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, labor or Christian Democrat. This is just the facts, Jack. That by definition, all government purchases are third-party purchases, made with money that's not theirs to purchase things they will not personally consume. Therefore, will there be waste in the highway department? You betcha. Will there be waste in the Defense Department? You can count on it. That's why we believe, as Abraham Lincoln said, the government should do only those things which a man cannot do better for himself. Why? Because every time we take $1 from an individual to save and invest and use to the maximum benefit of themselves and their family, and run it through a third-party system called government, we're in the process of making the nation poorer. And you show me what percentage of the gross domestic product of any city or state or nation, and the principle applies. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty. Therefore, we want to keep government as restricted as possible and freedom as great as possible. And that's why this little place called America produces more Nobel Prize winners than the other 96% of the world combined. Freedom allows and creates wealth. Now, if we understand that principle, the question would be, why would anyone do something that made people poorer? Don't they understand that if government takes things away from them, that they're going to be worse off? The fact is, many people do not know where wealth comes from. They don't know why it is that America invents all of these things. Why didn't the rest of the world do that? They don't understand the correlation between freedom, and it works like this. How is wealth created? That's the question we have to answer. How does one get money? The way one gets money, the way one creates wealth, is by figuring out how to do something good for someone else. Let us suppose there's a car going by your street. It's passing by your home. There are only 2 ways to get money out of that person's pocket in that car. One is called free enterprise. Free enterprise is where I lay awake nights figuring out ways to do something good for that person, such that They will slam on their brakes and pull in the parking lot and say, oh my goodness, you're going to clean my car and wash it and wax it and sweep out the carpeting and shine the windows and the dashboard. I would much rather have that than have this $10 bill. Or I would much rather have that pair of shoes than have this $50. Global positioning unit, I never get lost again, this will be great. I would much rather have that than have this $200. And under free enterprise, a person figures out a way to do something good for someone such that they make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. They are wealthier than they were before. They have created wealth. And so under a free enterprise, people figure out ways to do something good for someone else such that they can be rewarded for doing so. And the principle is, the greater the blessing, the greater the reward. You get 5 cups of coffee, you get 1 return. You get 5,000 cups of coffee, you get another. You get 50,000 cups, even greater. The greater the contribution, the greater the reward. And that's why we respect and appreciate people who bless others in abundance, because the more they bless, the greater they're rewarded, and that's how a person becomes wealthy. I was going out the door the other day, and my son said to me, he said, Dad, do you have the app that shows the gate where you're landing and where you're leaving when you're changing planes at the airport? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, there's this app that when you're taxiing, when you land, you can put in your flight and which flight you're going out, and it will bring up a map of the airport, and it'll show the gates that you're going in and then the gates you're going out. And during that 20-minute taxi, you can decide if it's right across the hall or if you have to go change wings or what have you do. And I said, well, how much is it? He said, it's 99 cents. Question. Is it worth 99 cents to me to have that on my phone for the next 3 years? The answer would be yes. But more importantly, why did someone do that? Why did someone make that application for my phone? Because they didn't want me to get lost in the Atlanta airport? No. They don't even know who I am. They hoped that by blessing me and perhaps a million others like me, that a million of us would download that and they would become a millionaire. And under free enterprise, the degree to which they bless other people is the degree to which they're rewarded. Now, here's the important thing. Under free enterprise, a person is reported not because of who they are, but because of what they do for others. And so let's talk about that app. I do not know if that app was done by a short, young, female Asian, or an older, tall, African-American male. Under free enterprise, it doesn't matter. All we care about is, does it work? Because under free enterprise, you're rewarded not because of who you are, but because of what you do for others. And where a nation is free, and they can engage in hope and opportunity and wealth, little 4% of the population of the world called Americans produce 1/4 of all the goods and services on the entire planet. I said, the car going by the house, there's 2 ways you can get money out of that person. One was free enterprise, where you bless them and they voluntarily reach in their pocket and bless you. Let me just emphasize that again as to how that works. That is, when they make the exchange, you get what you want, the other person gets what they want. You are both better off. Let's suppose there's a farmer and he has a pile of wheat, and there's a baker and he has 10 empty ovens. And the baker says, you know, if I had that guy's wheat, I could make donuts in the morning and sell them. I could be in business. The farmer says, I don't need his wheat. If I had his money, I could buy a new tractor and put a roof over the barn. And so the 2 of them come together and they make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. They are both wealthier than they were before. And if not, they don't make the exchange. They only do it if they can. Therefore, they have created wealth. And so the farmer, as he creates wealth, he then has money in which he says, if I hired this fella, I could then farm these next 40 acres, I could make even more. And as it creates wealth, they are able to create jobs. So you're driving by a farm and you see an airplane, you see a really nice tractor, and you see a nice barn, you see that person is wealthy. How are they wealthy? They are wealthy because they created something and exchanged it with others till they got what they wanted and they blessed the others. And so that's what free enterprise does. It creates the engine that blesses the world. I said there's 2 ways to get money out of that car going by. The other one is called coercion. Coercion is when I just come and I take it. Not because you voluntarily gave it to me, but because I can overpower you, because I'm either a criminal or the government, that I can just take it. Let's suppose that you come up to the street corner, and a criminal comes over, and he puts a gun in the window, and he says, I want to have 50% of everything in your purse. Well, question number one, has he created any wealth? No. Has he redistributed wealth? Yes, from you to him. But if he hasn't created any wealth, he's only redistributed, because the degree to which he benefits is the degree to which the other one is diminished. With no new creation of wealth, can a criminal create a job? Obviously not. There's no new wealth to create the job with. Let's don't call him a criminal. Let's call him a city councilman. And he says, if you have the audacity to drive through my city, whether it be Cleveland or Detroit or Buffalo or where, when you come through my city and you stop here, I am going to take half of everything that you make. Now what happens? Has the city councilman created any wealth? No. Has the councilman redistributed wealth? Yes, from the taxpayer to the tax spender. But the degree to which the tax spender is benefited is the degree to which the taxpayer is diminished. And so therefore, having not created any jobs, question, can a councilman create a job? Obviously not. Therefore, any politician that ever promises to you that he's going to create a job or he's going to do something for someone, understand, not like free enterprise where everybody benefits. Under socialism, under government, the government can never do anything. The government can never give you anything that it doesn't first take from someone else. And when it takes from that other person, they've lost their standard of living and they've lost their freedom. The greater the government, the greater the poverty. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth. And the percentage at which the government does that is the percentage at which the nation slides into poverty. And that's what politics is all about. You can listen to a politician for 10 minutes and you can tell where he's going to go. Now, why would people deliberately take a beautiful city and make it poor? Why would they take a state and make it? Why would they take a nation and make it poor? There has to be a question somewhere. Why do politicians say and do those things? Don't they mean well? Well, they might, but there's a value system. There has to be a starting point. Every barroom brawl, every schoolyard scuffle boils down to two words. The question is, who says? What is the standard? And there's only two standards. One is what I say, and the other is what God says. One is what man says, and the other is what God says. And every other decision flows from that. And our founders were not ambivalent as to which one to choose. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson used the words, in all disquisitions of every kind, there are certain primary truths or first principles upon which all subsequent reasoning must depend. So our founders had a beginning. If I'm going to build a building, I have to know one spot at which I can lay out this building. And once I have that spot established, everything else works from there. Now it's important that that be true, because once I've laid the groundwork and put in the basement and the footers, suppose someone moves it 6 inches while I'm building the second floor. Well, the second floor will be out of whack. Suppose someone comes along and says, marriage is not between a man and a woman, marriage is between 3 men. And the standard changes. Now the second floor is even worse off. Unless there is a standard that we can rely upon, we cannot be safe. And so, our founders laid it out. They understood that there are only two sources of right and wrong. You go into a philosophy bookstore, or you go into the library and pull down a philosophy book, by page 3, you can tell which philosophy to choose, because there's only two worldviews. Either you believe that man created God, or you believe that God created man. And everything else flows from that decision. If you believe that man created God, then you believe that man has his own standard. If you believe that God created man, then you believe that God has a standard. If you believe that man is his own standard, then you believe that man is basically good. By what standard would he not be good? However, if you know that God has a standard, you recognize that we fall short. If man is basically good, then anything that goes wrong can't be his fault. And so whose fault is it? Well, it has to be the fault of the environment. The reason that something goes wrong is because there wasn't a government program to fix the housing. The reason he didn't maintain the housing or mow the lawn is because the government didn't tell him how. And so if a man is going around not being a proper father and impregnating these women and not being a responsible husband, it can't be his fault because he's good. It has to be the fault of the schools didn't pass out enough condoms in the classroom. Or if someone walks into a theater and starts shooting people, everybody intuitively knows that that's not right. But if man is good, it can't be his fault. And so whose fault is it? Well, it has to be the gun's fault. I mean, this gun coming in here doing those bad things, which always makes me ask the question, if guns kill people, how does anyone ever get out of a gun show alive? But God said that man's heart is responsible for his decision making. And then the final example is this. If there is no God, if you believe that man is supreme, then where do rights come from? They would have to come from man, from the group. And so when you listen to a politician for 60 seconds, he always talks about women's rights or Hispanic rights or African American rights or gay rights. There are no such things as blonde, left-handed rights. There's only rights that come from God, and they apply to everyone equally. Our founders made it abundantly clear. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator. Their rights come from God. And that choice faces every politician. You listen to them in short order, you'll find out which side they're on. Now, when it comes from the group, that's very, very dangerous. Our daughter spent a year in Rwanda. 80% of the people in Rwanda are Hutu and 20% are Tutsi. 80% voted to kill the 20%. And over the course of 90 days, with machetes, they chopped 1 million people to death. Without God, man always ends up killing. If you believe that man is supreme, and man is in control, and man is his own standard, and man is basically good, then you will always want to have more government because you want to implement your standard of right and wrong because you're the standard. If you believe that God is the standard, then you will understand that you will want greater freedom, greater opportunity. You want a limited government to do only those things which we can't do. If you believe in having more government, how's the best way to get more government? Very easily, more taxes. The more I take away from you, the more I control you, the more I regulate you. So therefore, these people will always want more taxes. Oh, they begin with a process about this is a difficult time and I don't want more taxes, but during this critical moment we have, and they will always want more taxes. The other folks will always want to have fewer taxes. Why? Well, you understand. They want more freedom. The third example is these people will always want a weak defense. Every dime that's spent to defend the country is one less dime that they can give out for a political program of some kind. The other folks want to have a strong defense. Now this causes the left real concern. They say, you people always talk about you want smaller government and you want lower taxes, but you always vote for a strong defense. The answer to that is correct. That's right. Because limited government protects our freedom. And lower taxes protects our freedom. And strong defense protects our freedom. And we believe that is something that government should do. And the final example is, if you're the standard, then you can decide on some Tuesday afternoon that marriage is not what God said, but we've decided that marriage is between 3 men, or between 2 men and 3 women, because they're the standard. They can define anything they want. I'm the standard. You have no right to challenge me. If you do, you're a bigot, narrow-minded. However, if you believe that God created man, then you believe that God has a standard, and He defines what marriage would be. Now, there's a thing called a Strategic Defense Initiative, which America invented. Ronald Reagan said, it'd be better if when somebody shoots a missile at the United States, it would be a lot better if we shot down the missile before it hit us. And everyone on the left has said, no, we want the missile to hit us. And so through fits and starts, we have never been able to protect America from incoming missiles. We developed the system. We protect Israel with Iron Dome. We could protect our friends in Europe. But in America, you had to have a trilateral hookup between the latitude and longitude and altitude. And so finally, George Bush was able to sign a contract that by May of 2009, the missiles were going to be in Poland and the radar were going to be in the Czech Republic, and America would finally be protected from an incoming missile. But we changed presidents in January of 2009, and he canceled it, such that today, if a missile is fired by accident or design from Russia or China or Iran, we are vulnerable. You show me where a person stands on that Strategic Defense Initiative, and I can tell you within a 90% certainty where they stand on cutting the capital gains tax to create jobs. You tell me where a person stands on marriage, I'll tell you where they stand on passing out condoms in a classroom. It's a worldview based upon man or based upon God. Our founders were not ambivalent about which one to choose. They wanted to make it abundantly clear. And then finally, what is the consequence of the two worldviews? Where man is in charge, man will define what is right or wrong, and then he can hold you accountable for not meeting his standard. And he can decide that there shouldn't be any Jews in the country, and then he can kill them because he has the standard of right and wrong. There's a term for that, by the way. It's called tyranny. It means that the majority will decide what is right or wrong. Because without God, there was no protection of rights. Rights come from the majority. Rights come from the group. And so when you listen to these folks, when they talk, they will decide at which point they will redefine anything that they want. And you do not have a say. You're not protected. But our founders said, no, no, no. With God, we will follow his example, and it will protect rights. Now, let me just tell you how it worked. They met in Philadelphia, what is now called Independence Hall, to try to do something that had never been done in history. To take a country and say, just because God made you, not because of your bloodline or not because of the land that you own, but just because you are a child of God, you shall be able to choose your own form of government and your own destiny. And so they laid it out in a very simple phrase in our birth certificate, which says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, what is truth? Truth is the starting point. There has to be a standard which everyone else refers to. If you're going to build a building, you have to have a stake from which you measure all of the rest of the foundation. There has to be a point at which it's determined to be truth. And everything else is just opinion. If I say that a platform is 24 feet wide and you say it's 28 and somebody else says it's 30, if we measure it, the measurement is the truth. God said, I am truth. And everything else is just opinion. That's why there is an attack on God. That's why there is an attack on truth. And our founders, they knew it was coming. We know that there is truth. And truth overcomes error. Error cannot tolerate truth. Truth does not fear error because truth overcomes error. Let me explain. Let us suppose that you're the prosecutor and you have a fellow that has stolen an ATM machine, and you're prosecuting him for doing that. And he has a defense counsel, and the defense counsel gets up in the courtroom and she says, now he didn't do that. No, sir, he was off in Oregon having dinner with his sister, and I have the receipts here from this restaurant, and that's where he was. And you don't worry about the error. You don't care about the lies because truth overcomes error. And you have a video of him driving up there, and you have the picture of his face as he leans over the ATM and his fingerprint as he pushes the button. You see him loaded onto the back of his pickup. And that truth overcomes error. Therefore, the only way error can survive, it has to prevent the presentation of truth. So currently we face this very difficult confrontation of those that want to extract God from America. They want to take under God out of our Pledge of Allegiance. They want to take prayer out of our schools and out of our public events. They want to separate us. They want to take the cross off of the city seal. The question would be, why do they care about that so much? Why are they so concerned about that? because truth overcomes error. That's why that they shout down conservative speakers on college campuses. That's why they don't allow conservatives to become professors in our state institutions. That's why the left burns books. You never have conservatives burning books because truth does not fear error. But error cannot tolerate truth. It has to prevent its presentation. If I'm at an inaugural, I can pray in the name of anything you can think of. I can wave eagle feathers and do it, and no one will complain. But if you pray in the name of Jesus Christ, I am the way, the truth. If you pray in the name of truth, all hell will break loose against that. And so our founders said, we understand that battle. Our founders knew what truth was. And so they began, we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a gracious Jeffersonian way of saying, any idiot ought to understand this. This is self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed not by a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court, not by a majority, are endowed by their Creator. So where do rights come from? Not from the majority. The rights come from God, their Creator. And they're given certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of the American government is to preserve life. First, last, and always. I don't care if you're running for dog catcher or president of the United States. Politicians, you'll hear them say, well, I don't think government ought to be involved in that. Now, that should be between a woman and a doctor, and I don't think that, I don't want government in the bedroom. You're in the wrong country. In America, the only nation on earth that does this, in America, the purpose of government is to preserve life. Then liberty, see the sequence. Liberty is a precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first, then liberty, then sewer systems and overpasses, but the first thing you do is life. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So when they established America, they said that we are going to create a government dedicated to the protection of life, and that if Jews are attacked any place on the planet, they know that if they could just get under the protection of America, if they could just be where the American flag is, that their lives would be protected. If a ship is attacked on the high seas, this happened over 300 times last year, to whom can that person appeal for help? The 350,000 Americans that wear the uniform of the United States Navy. America has become the standard for righteousness in the world. Everybody knows that if they can just get to American soil, if they can just appeal to the American, when the Israelis and the Egyptians are signing a peace accord, where would they sign it? Would they sign it in Paris or at the United Nations? They come to America, because America is the standard for right and wrong in the world. The banking system, the legal system, the inventions, the rest. In a pure democracy, people believe the rights come from the majority. In America, you can vote 98-2 to lock up Jews. You can't do it in America, because in America, our rights don't come from the majority. Our rights come from God. And the purpose of government is to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, once they were able to do that, they created the hope of all mankind. But they had 13 individual countries, 13 individual states, 13 individual currencies. They found out that they could agree upon absolutely nothing. They'd done everything they could possibly do to try to enjoy the new freedom that no nation on earth had ever had before. The fact that just because God had made someone, that they then had standing to run their country, but they were struggling. And in 1787, under the leadership of George Washington, the states were invited to send delegates back to the same place where 11 years earlier they'd written the Declaration of Independence, now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And each state with its delegations tried to work together. 50% of the people lived in 3 states. 50% of the people lived in 10 states. The 10 states aren't going to be dominated by the 3, and vice versa. A handful of states wanted to preserve slavery. John Adams up in Massachusetts, he said there's no way we fought for independence to have slavery. And so they could agree upon nothing and began to break apart. After 5.5 weeks, it started to all disappear. And the hopes and the prayers of all these folks that had fought for independence saw it disappearing. And the story is told that George Mason got in his carriage. He was George Washington's next door neighbor down in Virginia, his best friend, and As he was leaving, Washington walked along the side of the carriage and said, Mason, you can't leave. This is the only time, might never come again in the history of man, that we could form a government based upon the fact that God made people, regardless of their bloodline or how much property they own, just because God made them special. We can't let this slip through our fingers. Mason said, Washington, I don't have time for this. I can't sit around talking about politics all summer long. He said, I've got other things to do. But Washington was able to corral them all back into the chamber, back into that room at Independence Hall. And the oldest member, the one that had been there when they signed the Declaration, he had negotiated the peace treaty in 1783 for the independence of America and was committed to its growth and success. But he had not spoken, and he saw what was happening. He asked to speak for the very first time. Benjamin Franklin stood. The room became quiet, and he said these words. He said, Mr. President, the small progress that we have made after 4 or 5 weeks is a melancholy proof of the imperfection of human understanding. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government. We've examined the different forms which now no longer exist. We have viewed modern states all around Europe, but none of their constitutions are suitable for our circumstances. In this situation, in this assembly, groping in the dark to find political truth, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? In other words, we've been crawling around here in the dark and nobody's bothered to go turn on the lights. Let's pause for a moment as to why he would say these things, mentioning that we studied all these other constitutions. Wisdom is the proper use of knowledge. You can teach a 12-year-old how to drive a car. The reason you don't throw your keys to a 12-year-old, he lacks the wisdom, the proper use of the knowledge. Education is wonderful, but there comes a time when you need the wisdom as to how to apply it. How do you get wisdom? 2 ways. First of all, from experience, your own or someone else's. And so our founders had all of the previous constitutions all around the world and saw that they had flaws that collapsed, that after 100 years or 50 years or 25 years or less, they didn't work. And so the founders said, if this doesn't work, what do we do? Well, there's a second source of wisdom. The scripture says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. Or in other words, he doesn't scold us for asking. He's pleased to do it. And so what they said was, when we were in a dilemma, our independence was really questionable. This little band of freedom fighters taking on the strongest military in the world, we had prayer in this room every day. In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. And then Franklin went on to say this, and have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need him? Now think about that. This is not 200 years later. This is 11 years later. And then he said this, I've lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire could rise without his aid? We've been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Well, I believe this also, that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building, no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore beg leave that we move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and his blessing on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. They recessed for 3 days, many for prayer and fasting. They met the following week, and then over the next 5.5 weeks, they wrote the Constitution of the United States of America. When we began some moments ago, we talked about the abundance that spot, wherever that Constitution goes, there's been peace and prosperity and abundance. Every government on earth has been changed repeatedly, and yet this has been available as a template, the apex in human government. America is one of the youngest nations. It has the oldest government, and so the founders said, we know what allowed this to happen. Our prayers appealing to heaven and God's guidance made this possible. Therefore, let us never meet again without first calling upon God in prayer.
The House will be in order.
And If the House of Representatives meets today to take a message from the Senate, the Speaker will walk in, bang the gavel.
Let's pray.
They will have prayer. They'll receive the message from the Senate, bang the gavel, and adjourn. Congress has never met during all these 200 years without first calling upon God in prayer, recognizing that He is the source of America's strength. They said, let us continue that such that every official document, we want to make it abundantly clear. And so after we've declared Groundhog Day or passed a bill of any sort, we'll put at the end, sober up, here's the serious, done in this, the year of our Lord, the 2000 and whatever, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 200 and whatever date. And then they said, we need a starting point. We need a truth point. We need a place to start. So whenever a person takes a position of public trust, I don't care what it is, dog catcher, president of the United States, they must first swear allegiance to God on the Bible, not on man. You can't trust man. So we need to rely upon God, and that'll be our starting point. It was the spiritual values supporting those words that made them worthwhile. John Adams said, we have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. The spiritual support for our Constitution made America. The father of our country, George Washington, when he was leaving office, having done so much to bring about this great country, he wanted to leave words of counsel. In his final presentation, he said, of all of the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principles. If we abandon the Word of God, if we abandon the principles that supported those words, the Constitution itself is not powerful enough to sustain it. Every generation sometimes questions as to whether or not the greatness that brought us to the point that the richest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, can it be continued? And some folks that don't know how they got there, they'll say, well, it's all over, it can't happen. Let me just tell you, those principles work. And I'll tell you that there's nothing wrong with America that proper leadership can't cure. You know, when you do things right, a nation prospers. When America began, our financial system, we had 13 individual currencies between the colonies. It was just in chaos. Some states had great debt, other states didn't. And the currency was just totally untrusted. And when they met in Philadelphia to write the Constitution, one of the provisions was that the president shall from time to time provide reports on the State of the Union. Now, it's called a State of the Union address, and George Washington did it every year, and that's become the tradition. You know, George Washington, in his third State of the Union address, America was only 3 years old. Now, remember where he came from. We were in chaos to the point that the people in North Carolina wouldn't accept the currency from South Carolina, and they had riots in Charlotte from the farmers that couldn't get their wheat. And when they met in Philadelphia to put the country together, here we are just 36 months later, and he said this in his third State of the Union address. He said, the United States enjoys a scene of tranquility and prosperity under the new government that could hardly have been hoped for. Our public credit stands on that high ground, which 3 years ago it would have been considered a species of madness to have foretold. In other words, in modern language, if I would have told you 3 years ago that America would have the strongest currency in the world, you would have said I was crazy. But because he did the right things, America became very strong. What's the point? We have learned that if you do the wrong thing, you can take a great city, a great state, a great nation, and you can destroy it. The corollary of that is, if you do the right thing, you can restore it. We saw how rapidly America was born. You and I hold in our hands the capacity for America to be stronger and better and more powerful and more respected than it's ever been in the past. It's simply up to us to choose to follow those godly principles that build us in the first place. And I, for one, I have no doubt the future is going to be the best as we absorb the truth that righteousness exalteth a nation. Thank you. God bless.